Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Brief. We're very, very fortunate to have Bryan Bullock with us today. Bryan is the VP of Global Strategic Marketing with Avita Medical. Bryan, thanks so much for being here. Why don't you get us started by sharing a little bit about your background and what you're up to lately?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me as well. Excited to be here. As you share with me, I'm share with the group rather. I'm the global strategic marketer at Avita Medical, and I've been here now about 2 years. But my journey here hasn't been a straight path. I've kind of bounced around through a variety of roles, different industries, and I would say that I've always been an idea guy that's willing to say yes and also inspired to drive execution. Right. So when I think about when I first started my journey many years ago. I can't even think of them right now, but I came out with an intent to go into investment banking. That didn't agree with me so much. And so I had a chance to go into sports entertainment. But I say throughout that, what was happening consistently is I was getting opportunities to drive growth, right? And so from sports entertainment, I did ultimately get into investment banking for a short bit. I came into healthcare. And in healthcare, I was asked to do some startup incubation type growth cells. And I did that for about 10 years. And throughout that cycle, I had opportunity to kind of venture all over the world and touch many different pockets and different communities that were affected differently by healthcare inequalities. And from there, I got exposed to what it means to be a disruptive associate, to be a disruptive leader, to market disruptive technologies. And from there, I was able to pivot into aesthetics. And so I launched an aesthetic brand that was sought to disrupt the industry that had been accustomed to short-term results. And so I did that for a few years. And then I was asked to come on board to continue to lead the disruptive effort around wound care specifically. And so I joined Avita Medical with the intention to reset the norm around how do you treat burn victims, burn patients? How do you equip surgeons and their care staffs with the right tools to facilitate quicker healing and more improved aesthetic outcomes? And so it's been a very interesting pathway that I've taken. As a guy that grew up in Alaska, I don't think anyone would have predicted my career arc. As a person who slept through more marketing classes than I should have when I was in university, I don't think anyone would have expected me to end up in marketing. But through it all, I would say it comes back to that notion of I've always had a lot of ideas. And I've always had a lot of captive energy and enthusiasm to affect change. And that's allowed me to have a number of stops throughout my career to add value.
Bryan, that's awesome. How's a guy from Alaska end up at MU Columbia? That like connect the dots there and get a BSBA in finance. Like I would have, fishing, outdoors, like all the Alaska, tourism, all the possibilities there. And you just said I want to be a numbers guy. How'd that happen?
Well, I would say numbers always came easy for me. And when I think about Missouri specifically, when I chose it, I grew up envious at everyone else in the contiguous or the lower 48, we refer to them as the United States. And I said, hey, one day I'm going to make it to America. And so I think growing up in Alaska, I grew up with the immigrant's mindset, right? That I was excluded from going to water parks and the Disneylands and, McDonald's at every corner if you wanted to. At the time, also MTV was really big in road rules and real world, and they were kind of displaying all the extravagances of life. And so for me, I was like, you know what, I got to make it to the US, right, at some point. And so for me, I also grew up somewhat detached from my family. So I think the average person has cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents they spend holidays with, family get together, special occasions throughout their years. And growing up in Alaska, I never had that afforded. And so as a result of that, I was like, you know what, I need to make sure that I'm surrounded and an opportunity to kind of reestablish and build community. So it happened that my mother, she grew up in St. Louis. Her parents were there. I had some aunts, uncles, and cousins. And it was the university that made the most sense to give me somewhere to go during some of those school breaks, right? The Labor Day breaks, the Memorial Day breaks, the Easter breaks where schools shut down. Where do you go? And Missouri kind of fit that bill for me. Having said that, it's probably about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, I was cleaning out my garage. And so I was going through some old notebooks and some applications to university. And I was surprised by all the schools that I applied to. What surprised me is as much as I kind of tell this narrative that, hey, I wanted to connect with, extended family members, et cetera. I looked at all the schools I applied to. I applied to schools in the Northeast, the schools in the Southeast, schools in the Midwest, some schools in the West Coast as well. And it was one of those moments I reflected upon how each of those would have taken me a different place. I ultimately chose Missouri because it was comfortable, right? It was easy. I had people that I could call upon. Not as academically challenging as some of the other schools I applied to and got accepted to, but it was the right place for me because what it did allow is for me to delve into a range of really disciplines. So I came out with an interest in math and science. I then met a girl, got distracted, kind of went down the path of marketing and some of the softer elements of it. But what I was always attracted to is really how you create industries and finance, specifically finance, and the path that was afforded to those that were in financial markets, I thought were kingmakers and industry builders. And I wanted to understand what that process was. I do think there's a special conversation around finances and monetary value, et cetera. And so Missouri was the best program for me at the time.
I love it. That's great. At Model B, one of the things we do is for any client we work with, we step back before we get started and we map out an ecosystem map to understand how they make money.
Mm.
Why? Because if you don't, you're just doing ads, right?
Exactly.
And that's the easy part, honestly. It's understanding how the cause and effect relationship between the organization and their best customers and how that symbiosis has to occur that you have to really be careful about. So you went from finance degree at MU and great school, by the way. I mean, I admire it tremendously. I live in Kansas City at the moment and have actually done some marketing with UMKC.
Okay.
Definitely know the system. And but then you went to Northwestern, this terrible little Chicago school. Uh, my son went to Loyola Chicago, and so we were up in that area quite often visiting him, and many of his friends went to Northwestern. Great school. My uncle actually went to Northwestern, and it was definitely a phenomenal university and a great part of the country.
Yeah.
So tell us about what led you to there, because I'm sure you had options.
Yeah.
So tell what led to that in the MBA path.
Yeah. So perhaps it wasn't so clear in my intro, but so my first job out of school, I went into tax accounting, right? When I first graduated from Missouri, absolutely hated it. It was a job that was interesting. I learned a lot, right? But wasn't challenging enough. And then I took a role with the National Basketball Association that we're building out the minor league system for the NBA. At the time, it was referred to as the NBA Development League. Now it's referred to as the G League or the Gatorade League. It so happens I was in a position where I'd been promoted into director of business operations for the NBA. So I was in charge of really the back office portions for the minor league system and helping to grow and expand that territory. It so happens that I replaced a former Harvard Business School graduate, and I was impressed with myself and my abilities to kind of perform in that capacity. And I thought I should get equal compensation for my contributions to the role, and the company thought otherwise. Like, hey, you know what? You don't have an MBA, therefore you can't command as much in this negotiation. And so I took that to heart, and I said, well, you know what? I'm going to change that. I'm going to go and get an MBA. At the same time, the MBA had started to work with a number of MBA students, right? Helping to look at how do we expand the ownership model for now the G League. And so we had a slew of, I think at the time would have been a Harvard Business School graduates. We would have had Anderson out of UCLA graduates kind of working on special projects. And so when I applied to grad school, I was like, you know what, I'm going to choose the best. At the time, Kellogg consistently had demonstrated, its ability to always be in the top three. And so I applied to school there with the intent of going into just business management, more of a general management degree. However, there are really two entry points to investment banking. So one is when you come out of undergrad and you're part of one of the target programs. And two, when you come out of grad school and you go into investment banking as well. And based on the work I've been doing at the MBA, we were very close to the mergers and acquisition and business development team. And so I knew that there was an interest in doing M&A, right? So mergers and acquisitions. And so when I applied to grad school, when I applied to somewhat as a frustrated employee, thought I could, earn more than I was being compensated with. But two, with a person who was still had a long-term interest in getting into investment banking. And thirdly, just the work of helping to unlock value, right? Understanding where 1 + 1 = 3, or maybe equals 5 by combining two different entities together. And so I raised my hand, I did my work, and I had a chance to go to a number of schools, and I chose to go to Kellogg. I got accepted to Kellogg, and I chose to go there with the sole desire that I wanted to go into mergers and acquisition upon acceptance and when I got out. And it led me to a wild ride, a lot of international activities. And ultimately, I did succeed by going into investment banking on the back end of that, but ultimately came about from being a jilted employee. But I was adding a lot of value, kicking ass, and driving engagement and attachment to various things. And I just need to have more credentials, sharp credentials to carve out more of a larger piece of the pie for yourself.
Got it. That's great. I love that. So, you know, phenomenal school, phenomenal program. When did you get your Series 63 and 7? Like, not many marketers in particular have those stripes. I mean, that's a hardcore investment guy, or seat on the
Yeah.
exchange or something. What led you down that path?
Yeah. Well, happy to say it was a requirement of investment banking. So you come out, you need to be an expert whiz at Excel modeling or building out financial models, reading financial statements, income statements, balance sheets, and kind of building cash flow statements. Another requirement is that you meet the FINRA requirements for various regulations. And so these were some of the entry examinations that you had to take. And even though they say you can take it again, if you fail once, you're kind of kicked out of the program. And so you kind of put your head down and you study like you need to. And I will say that one, I appreciate when I reflect upon my career, I appreciate those moments where I've had to demonstrate like exacting discipline, right, to accomplish what you want to do. I think taking those examinations, financial examinations, were one of those moments where you have bogged down, you know, block out the noise and just concentrate. And I would say it's something that definitely served me well in terms of referring back to various elements throughout my career, but also recognizing these are badges of honor that I've been able to kind of maintain and kind of use as points of reflection, and also use them as points of mentorship when I train and talk to other young individuals looking to go down those pathways.
I love it. I love it. So you mentioned that you were at an aesthetics company. One of the things I find interesting about here is a aesthetics company, predominant customer base is female, right? And yet when I look at the leadership of the company, it's all guys. Like, tell me about that. How'd that feel to you? And or was that just the way the web shows up, the organization? And, it's not uncommon. I mean, unfortunately, there's not many women in senior roles in a lot of companies, but, typically in the beauty space, in aesthetics and beauty space, there does tend to be at least some broader balance. And I mean, you have more male female balance at your company now than the previous company had. Was that something you noticed, or was it is it just the way that the organization came together?
Well, I think the leadership team assembled before I arrived, but I will say it was something we noticed and something we talked about. And the way we talked about it was more so I would say, somewhat senior, but more the mid-level employees, there was a higher percentage of women within that group, right? And so they definitely bonded together and said, hey, we're going to reshape this narrative and this dynamic in terms of, hey, how women are contributing to this space, despite having this senior leadership level. Now, that said, our chief operating officer was a female. She replaced the predecessor that was a male. But you go down some of the challenges, those that were actually making the most critical decisions around our portfolio of products were women. So we had Taryn Conway, who was our general manager. We had the head of our filler product line, that was a woman. And when I think about who I worked alongside with, I was working with some very powerful, badass women that it, in some respects, it was more female dominated because it's probably maybe on the day-to-day execution is probably like 90% women and 10% men.
Mm.
It just so happens at that board of director, president level, it were, and maybe this head of sales, those were males, but everyone else was largely women.
Got it.
Um, and so it led to really a refreshing place to work because the ideas that would come forth would be ideas that necessarily weren't the ideas that I would have anticipated kind of starting and ultimately ending on, but it did foster a spirit of greater inclusion, right? There's a lot more consideration given into the thoughts and contributions of every associate, whereas having been a part of some very male dominated settings before, you might have a autocratic leader that says, hey, I've set the path and everyone else needs to fall in line. And so my experience with that work dynamic led to a lot more collaboration and just the opportunity for everyone, good idea or bad idea, to be heard. And so that's a testament really to the senior leaders that we had. I think Taryn Conway, who I've named already, but I think she deserves tremendous amount of credit for really giving a voice to many individuals and to really have an opportunity for people to stand on the podium and to share their opinion, but most importantly, be empowered to drive and execute those strategies that we had decided across the community.
Got it. Got it. Um, one of the things that when we first connected, you talked about is being a really that you, I think you, the way you put it was driven to execution, that you really put a lot of time and effort into making sure execution happens really right. And going to go back a little bit in time, when you were with BD Medical, you won a number of awards, recognition for different things. One that surprised me when I noticed it was the successful redesign and launch of the U.S. sales training curriculum and playbook. That's not typically the kind of sexy stuff that people go, that's award winning, but tell me about that and like why that was award worthy in your mind.
Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because I think in every organization there's a classic tension between sales and marketing, right? I think sales reps think, hey, marketer is necessary, can improve upon the tools and the information and the messages they give to the sales reps to sell products. And there's often times that marketers say, my salespeople will just execute what I put forth in this playbook. And so for me, when I go back to that period in time, I think it's a reflection of that we could maintain the status quo and continue to eke out 1%, maybe 2% year over year growth in particular categories. But what happens every time you go through a new leadership change, leadership regime moving in, you kind of reassess the landscape and say, hey, what are our competitive threats? And is there an opportunity for us to take outsized share gain or to introduce a new category, a new space? It just so happened at BD specifically, it was a time that we were going to dive into a new industry. And so for that new industry, there's an opportunity to kind of revisit our field deployment strategies. And we knew that if we continue to kind of do things the way we've been doing previously, we would eke out similar results as a status quo. And so it was a great chance for me to kind of work like knee deep in the trenches with sales leaders to kind of reshape how we thought through sales training. So typically, from a sales training perspective, and I've been across the sale and variety of my roles throughout my years, is you're typically building out things with a very narrow view. Maybe it's informed based on some targeting work or some segmentation work that you've done. You created this boilerplate, right? Which typically results in, talking about product performance or talking about the financial advantage or talking about clinical superiority. And then you have all these specific messages that are linked to that. And so this approach was a little bit different because what we did is we inserted ourselves as sales individuals working alongside customers. So customers were invited into the way that we built out some of the sales playbooks. And so we're hearing firsthand information from customers and understanding what are some of those challenges, what are their pain points, and how do those uh, either coincide or align with some of the challenges and hurdles of the sales reps. And so when we rebuild this whole infrastructure around a sales playbook and execution, it was a chance for us to very clearly, why should a customer change, right? Why should they change from what they're doing today? We want them to adopt new technology. Why is it critical that they change? More specifically, why should they change now? Right? Because I think there's always an opportunity for a person to shift. And ultimately, why should they select the BD portfolio of products. And so when we designed that new playbook, we built it in that prism. Why change? Why now? Why BD products? And so because we took this holistic approach of feeding in customer insight, sales insight, marketing insight, what we ended up with was a toolkit that had been validated by customers, that had been appreciated and accepted by the sales rep, something that links specifically to discrete tools that you could use in a variety of selling scenarios, a a buying process that forced alignment between the customer and the BD associate to understand where you are in the stage of the sales cycle. And ultimately, on the downstream of that, we had a lot more leading indicators in terms of how sales performance was tracking, as opposed to the lagging indicator that typically most companies appreciate, which is sales, right? But sales happen many months, many weeks down the road.
Yep.
And so, how do you have those mile markers on this highway of sales performance that give you a positive indicator that you're moving towards the right things? And so, that effort to kind of remap and kind of reshape that sales playbook, I'm happy to say it was best in class, something that, again, I'm no longer at BD, but from what I've been told from those that I work alongside with there, I still kind of maintain relationships with, is something they've continued to kind of reinforce and kind of stand behind. It's actually been such a powerful tool that I've actually brought it into other organizations as we kind of think through. I'm going to use a few acronyms in our discussion, Chris. One of the acronyms I use is SOAP, right? So strategy on a page. And so what is that very tight one-page document that gives you an indication of how this product should be placed within the market and ultimately how to drive effect in terms of focus on. So I've been able to leverage a lot of those elements, come all the way through, demonstrate not just success at BD, but demonstrate success at Repass and ultimately transfer that up to success at Adita Medical as well.
Nice. So I heard a couple of things there I want to pull apart a little bit. The medical in general is a category, even wound care, like just calling it wound care. It's like, I mean, having worked in hospital accounts in the past and, the service lines, right? I mean, internally, the way that these things get structured and what they get called has a nice organizing principle, but it almost commoditizes it in a way and makes it feel less like saving people's lives and the good side of like what healthcare is really there to do and the care and positive impact of it all. But wound care is a great example to me because helping people have great outcomes after a wound or burns. I mean, that's tough stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
and you've got a in every healthcare situation that is the case, you've got an economic story to tell to the administrators, right? You've got insurance conversations to get through to get them to buy in. You've got this clinical conversations to make sure that the clinicians and surgeons are going to say yes to whatever you're saying is better,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of hurdles. Like, so when you do that, is it titrated by audience segment, or is there a common theme that you bring to the table that you find resonates with everybody?
Well, it's a great question. And I would say it depends on the scenario. I think generally, depending on the stage and infancy of a company, and I just take Avita Medical, for example, right now, we are at a stage where we can get by with telling a singular story that has multiple facets that will appease to the broader community. One of the things that I've found kind of thinking through, um, so if I think about it from some of the different sales philosophies and sales models, they say, hey, you should always tailor your argument to the specific person that you're talking to, right? So if you're talking to a physician, hey, what are those elements of the value proposition that are going to resonate with the surgeons? If we're talking specifically to procurement, hey, what are the things that are going to, be relevant to them? Well, what I found though is in those scenarios, everyone has a different understanding of the offer of the solution based on their individual needs. And so when they go into a decision form to kind of make a yes or no or go or no go decision on a product, they're all stumping from their respective platforms. And so it's very hard to force alignment to the same hopefully decision that they're going to choose your product. And so one of the things we've been looking at is looking at the collective group dynamic and say, hey, what is this group or this account? What are their common beliefs in terms of pain points and challenges? And how do we speak to that? Right. So it might be a hospital system that is, has a higher concern for cash flow, right? And so we think about the economic advantage. It may be a singular story we tell about Avita Medical products that speak to our role in helping to either get patients out more quickly or to reduce their procurement costs associated with various products or to provide some support and education on reimbursement and coding, et cetera. But we'll stay in the lane of that financial argument as opposed to splicing it into the subsegments that might be more specific to the individual surgeons or the individual, care community of nurses and other physicians, assistants, et cetera. But I would say we have the luxury of, again, being somewhat early in our stages of growth. I think as we mature and we become a lot more diverse and a lot more dynamic as an organization, we'll definitely get into those segment-based specific communications. The good part that I do like to tease out, though, I think about just where we are from a digital marketing, just broad strokes, right? I think digital marketing unlocks the ability to have a million different conversations across everyone in the buying funnel. And so while we don't necessarily equip our sales reps in the current role with giving those segment or physician specific conversations, what we can do behind the scenes through digital marketing, some of the efforts that we have, or are building out messages and stories that resonate to the individual user and their specific use case to make them excited about our products. And then we surround them with the other considerations when they're going through a value analysis committee to make a decision to choose this product or another product. And so I would say it's a multifactorial approach that we take.
Nice. Nice. That makes sense. Yeah. So two questions here. Tell me if I'm saying this brand name right. Cohelix.
Yep.
Okay. So Cohelix, when you built the launch video in March this year, I watched it. It totally, like, honestly, I felt like I could have gone to my local store and bought it because it felt like a consumer brand versus a trade brand. So nice job, because I think, in the B2B lane, and particularly in healthcare and medical devices and medical solutions, it's so like sausage making, it's so like fact based and RTB based instead of like, here's a belief system and here's what we stand for. Here's what the patients care about. Let's meet in the middle on this and invite everybody in. How'd you, First of all, and maybe you weren't a part of that, but like when you come up with names, and it's one of the hardest things, right? Because every good name is taken, not every good name, every like obvious name is taken, right? So that's why you have funny spelling, Cohealyx, right? It's not how you'd spell it if you just said it out loud, at least not the first time. But how do you come up with names? And then what led you down this path of this very atypical video to launch the brand out in March?
Well, I'm excited about the launch of Helix, right? It's a product that shows up a lot differently than some of the dermal matrices on the market today. And so what this product delivers is accelerated time to definitive closure, aka grafting, right? So graft readiness in, let's say, 7 days, or actually as early as 5 days, we've seen in some of our early clinical studies, whereas the typical dermal matrix is probably in the 14 to 28-day timeline. So I'm excited about this product being launched. As it relates to the naming approach we took was a very exhaustive one. So there are a lot of candidates that got thrown out there, but ultimately we chose Cohelix for a variety of reasons, right? So if you look at the anatomical structure of Cohelix, is a triple helix component to it. So that's where the helix comes from.
Yep.
That also plays nicely with the term healing in general, right? And the fact that this is a collagen matrix is where the co comes from. So this collagen providing this healing in the context of a helix is where Cohelix emerges from.
Nice.
Now, since then, we've kind of added a little bit more fanfare to kind of describing the naming convention, but that was the source for it. With respect to, you know what? I think I lost track of the question.
What name and how you came up with a video?
Oh, yeah, the video. So the video actually was something that was especially cool, right? So I think what happens when I think about medical devices and I think about just traditional, the sea of sameness, you're always in very sterile. Hey, here's the technical features of a product. Here's the attributes, et cetera. It's the very same humdrum, forgettable. And so what I learned in aesthetics specifically is always when you have an opportunity, lend yourself to the emotion, right? If you can invite a little bit of flair of the dramatics into the conversation. And so we went out to produce a lot more social videos and kind of use that as a medium to really tell stories. Wanted to make sure we're bringing in that human element into these stories, right? Bringing a lot more color, a lot more imagery, a lot more motion, because I think historically, when you see some of these medical product videos, it's a very um, monotone. It doesn't oscillate at all. You kind of stay in the same frequency beginning to the end. And so we wanted to make people have a chance to just pause, take notice, say, hey, what is this product? Is not a consumer product good in the sense of consumers can't go to CVS or Walgreens to buy it. However, they should be informed when they're getting any healthcare, right? Should they need a product, whether you're a friend or a family member or a patient in need, to have a little bit more stickiness so you understand what your options are to make sure you're getting the best care. And so I am excited that what we introduced in terms of a different way to tell stories visually and with video with Cohelix is something that we are pulling forth across our portfolio. So PermeaDerm, ReCell, and just Avita Medical. We just did a showcase here recently in April called, I think it was the Innovation Showcase was the title we gave it. But that also started to invite in a slightly different stylistic way of telling our stories and kind of fusing concepts together that are very obtuse and can be very dense in a way that the common person can understand them, but more specifically, to start to resonate and start to pull forth some of those themes that you're really hoping to communicate in any video message or any written message to begin with.
Right. I love that. It's interesting. One of the techniques that I often use or our team uses in working with clients is we call it the cocktail party
Mm,
test. And we often get asked especially in healthcare, but even finance and technical clients, to feature the RTBs, the rational stuff, the helix matrix, the words, right, the things, um, and but the test we use is the cocktail test, because imagine being invited to a cocktail party by a friend and you arrive and they're not there yet, right? And because you kind of scan the room real
yep.
quick and you see there's 45, 50 people there. And the first person you walk up to, you don't walk up to them and say, "Hi, I'm Helix Matrix, blah, blah, blah," right? I'm an EFT, right? Like, what? You introduce who you are. And if they're interested, they'll say, "Oh, that's cool. Like, what's that? Like, tell me more," right? Then you can go down that path. But, you have to be more approachable as brands and have that human sensibility. You have to think about, like, being invited into the conversation versus being busy telling them what you want them to hear. And the video really did that when I looked at it. So nice job. And this is a group that did this, is one you've worked with before. You've had a good experience with them, which I always like seeing that repeat kind of collaboration. That's good to see. So as we think about the things that are going on, is there anything that at Avita Medical that's coming up, or that in the industry that that you want our listeners to hear, that you want to make sure stands out?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, obviously we're always in the market, right? We're always kind of at various conferences and trade shows, whether it be American Burn Association, whether it be at by regional shows on the trauma side, or even just looking at, last week we're at SAWC, which is a wound conference. I think what I would appreciate people to realize when you think about using our platform, our flagship technology, which is ReCell, so a ReCell spray on skin cells, um, there's been some really powerful data that's just been released, right? It's been released by the American Burn Association. They have a quality program where they look at all the patients they've been treating over 5, 6 years, right? So this study goes from 2019 through, I would say 2024, it could be 2025, it could be well there. But 6,300 patients were treated, right? If you think about those patients that were treated with RECELL as an adjunctive procedure, right? Our core technology, they weren't released from the hospital 36% faster than patients who were treated without RECELL. Now, if you translate that into days, that means a patient or a loved one, friend, family member going into the hospital with a serious burn, being treated and coming out of the hospital 5.6 days sooner. And so these are real life savings
Yeah.
that should ask everyone to say, am I fully embracing the opportunity to shift a standard of care for burn victims or trauma victims that RESET has been demonstrated to show accelerated healing. It's been demonstrated to show accelerated healing, particularly at that cellular level. And so that's one thing I want people to appreciate. So what's going to come up in the weeks ahead is we're going to build a lot more noise around this data set that's just been published from the ABA
Yeah.
to make sure that it goes to the farthest or the furthest reaches of really this space. So everyone understands there is an opportunity for patients to get home sooner, for hospitals to treat additional patients because they've opened up hospital beds. As we continue to tell that story, I think it will give us another opportunity to invite in other parts of how our portfolio specifically is built towards this phrasing that we use, healing at the speed of life, right? Life is busy, right? And so any chance you can take to get a patient back to their day-to-day activities of daily living, physicians, clinicians should embrace that. So I'm happy that Avita Medical is playing that role.
Well, the multiplier effect of that is the science shows that obviously once the patient's stable, their recovery rate's much stronger at home. I mean, the clinical environment, the hospital environment is not great for it's high stress, and you get interrupted every time you get to gentle sleep. You're poked and prodded and checked on, and which is essential at some point, but it's also like the recovery rate and the 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 stress level affects recovery rate pretty dramatically, and being in your home environment, assuming you're stable and ready for that, being there faster just accelerates. It's all around good. So it saves money, but it also is better for patients and their caregivers too. I mean, it's a win-win-win across the board. I love that. So, Bryan, this has been fantastic conversation. You've done a lot of really interesting things, so much so that Hollywood's going to do a biopic on you. What's the name of the film, or who's going to play you, or what's the plot or theme?
Um, hmm. Uh, I would say that the name of the film is Lace Them Up. And so I,
Nice.
I, I just got back from Australia and I ran a marathon, my first marathon. I'm happy to close out my continents with this trip. Well, I learned quite a bit running this marathon. And I learned that the first, let's say, 18 miles is a heck of a lot different than the last 6.2 miles, right? But it all starts with starting the race.
Yeah.
And I would say that when I think through what I've experienced in kind of my career arc, just my personal journey, it all started with saying yes, being persistent and showing up. So lace them up is a notion of nothing changes unless you submit yourself, where you say yes to starting the race. And then you'll surprise yourself with what your mental state can overcome despite your physical challenges. If you stay committed and keep that conviction, you're able to power through. I've yet to figure out who would be casted to play the role, but I know "Lace Them Up" would be the name of the biopic.
I love it. I love it. That's fantastic. So, Bryan, for those that want to reach out and connect with you, what's the best place to do that?
Best place to reach me is LinkedIn. So I'm pretty active there. And then I'm also on Instagram as well. So BRYBULL on Instagram would be my two places to find me.
Fantastic. Bryan, thank you so much. And to the listeners, thanks for hanging in there with us and checking out another episode of Beyond the Brief. With that, we'll conclude. And Bryan, thanks again one last time.
Thanks, Chris.